The topic for today is science and the Bible. Really bad lighting up here, I'll tell you that. It's great for singing, but it's hard for reading. But actually, that's not the full topic that Victor gave me. This is what Victor told me. Why, or asked me to explain. There you go. Technology. We're going to talk about technology today. Why does the Bible contain so much anti-scientific nonsense? And ditto. Primitive man wrote the Bible, not at all being God. I'd like to briefly address the second part of that first. If someone tells you that primitive or superstitious man wrote the Bible, please say, in a loving manner, let me tell you about the Bible. It's really a unique book. Well, actually, it's 66 books. And here's some facts that you want to relay about the Bible. It's written over roughly a 1,500-year period of time by 40 different authors, okay? From 3 continents, Africa, Asia, and Europe, written in 3 different languages. Most of the Old Testament, Hebrew, Daniel and Ezra, written in Aramaic, New Testament in Greek. And there are no historical errors or contradictions in that. I mean, these facts alone tell you that the Bible's a one of a kind, and that there are many amazing details that defy a natural explanation. Look at it. Shepherds, kings. Look who wrote the Bible. Shepherds, kings, a tax collector, a doctor, prophets, priest, a cupbearer. They all wrote the Bible. They all had contributions to it. It's amazing. Now, they had different immediate purposes for writing. Some were revealing history. Some were giving moral guidance. Some were judging. Some were given instructions on living. And where do they write it from? They compose it from a variety of places. Prison, wilderness, in exile, lots of places. But all the time, while they were writing history or laws or prophecy or Psalms or Proverbs, there was a consistency. Despite this marvelous array of topics, the Bible displays flawless consistency. It never contradicts itself or its common theme. Now just think about that. Today, if we would take 40 distinguished authors, Grisham, King, you name them, from 3 different continents, pick out 40 of them, give them a common theme. I want you to stay on this topic. Give them a couple years to work on it. Give them 2 years to work on it. But say, hey, no communication, no email, no text messages, no writing letters. Just stay on message. At the end of 2 years, we want to compile that and have a common thing. I doubt very seriously that could ever take place. I mean, it would be difficult right now if I would say, well, what I'm talking about today. And if tomorrow we might get 3 or 4, we wouldn't get a common 100% agreement on what I said. That's just the way human nature is. But over 1,500 years, 40 authors, common consistency. Okay. Now I think we've said enough about that. Natural explanations really can't really explain the Scriptures. The entire Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, displays divine intervention. Now, we could talk a whole lot more on this uniqueness of the Bible. We could spend the whole message talking about the Bible and the uniqueness of it. I think we've said enough. If not to change that person's mind, to disprove that the Bible wasn't written by primitive man, it certainly gives them some thought for concern. So I'd like to shift over now and talk about science and the Bible. Now, first off, let's be real clear about this. The Bible is not a science book. It was never, ever intended to be a science book. Yet, it is consistent with scientific facts. Now, the skeptics are going to say, did you just say the Bible is scientifically accurate? The answer is yes. The Bible is clearly like any other document in history. The claims it makes about science are not only true, they're necessary to fill in the blanks about the creation of the universe, the creation of the earth, mankind. They're necessary, and they provide the detail. Now, the more we study the Bible, the more we come to appreciate its flawless nature. Now, I want to just jump to the first question that we had up there. Why does the Bible contain so much anti-scientific nonsense? Now, if somebody asks you that question, the best way to respond is ask them where's the disconnect at? Show me the disconnect. It's much like, and I know you've probably heard this, someone will say to you, the Bible's full of contradictions. The answer to that is lovingly say, hey, show me one or two of those contradictions and let me try to explain them to you. What usually happens, it ends right there. They don't know where the contradictions are, where the confusion is. They just heard someone say the Bible contradicts itself. So again, the Bible's not a science book, yet it's scientifically accurate. Now please realize there is no concrete scientific evidence that contradicts the Bible. There isn't any. And you won't hear this, but many of the agnostic and atheist scientists, they will not admit that the scientific principles that they hold very dearly, many of them were founded by very godly men who were very staunch Christians. They put it by the wayside. Now, the word science means knowledge. It's a never-ending process of learning new things. I think we can take them down and then go up to the next one if you can put a blank in there. But we're ready to move pretty soon. Scientists cannot explain the beginning of the universe or the origins of life. They can't. They can only postulate or speculate what it is. But in Genesis, God states both of these origins as a matter of fact. Now in Genesis 1:1, we have the 4 scientific necessities for a beginning. Where they are. We need space. These are scientific necessities now. Scientists need space, they need matter, they need time, they need energy. Now let's plug in the so-called scientific necessities for the existence of the universe. In the beginning, that's time. God created, that's energy. The heavens, that's space. And the earth, that's matter. We could throw in there emotion because he says what? The heavens they're there because of the effectual power of God working. Psalm 33:9 says exactly the same things. For he spoke, and it came to be. He commanded, and it stood firm. Now, the truth is the Bible was ahead of scientific knowledge, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. Scientists know the universe is expanding. But God's word said that thousands of years before through Isaiah. In Isaiah 40:22, he says, it is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them like a tent to dwell in. That's in Isaiah 40:22. Then in Job, he says, he alone stretches out the heavens. Isaiah 44:24, 51:13, and Jeremiah 10:12, they all reference the same thing, stretching out the heavens. Now in 1929, astronomer Edwin Hubble, you know him, you've heard of him, showed that distant galaxies were what? They were receding farther from the earth. And then the ones farthest away, they were even receding faster. And that the universe is expanding. 1929, that was determined that that's what was happening to the universe. This leads me for an interesting concern for me is that the universe is expanding away from the earth. Maybe the earth is the center of God's attention in the universe. I don't know. That's Al DeSantis' thought on that topic. But the point is, Isaiah said it, and the Bible said it 3 or 4 other times, that the universe is stretching. God is stretching it. Confirmed in 1929 that the universe is expanding. And now in the next few minutes, I'm going to just whip out some things and some passages. And I won't read them. I'll just quote you, give you some references to them. Now, there are many more. You could do many more, but we're just going to pick out a few where the Bible doesn't contradict science, but maybe was ahead of science. But first, in Genesis, think of this a minute. In Genesis 22:17, pretty famous, God says to Abraham, blessing I will bless you. And we need to think about this verse today because I believe it. Blessing I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heaven, God says. And as the sands on the seashore, and your descendants shall possess the gates of your enemies. Okay. Now, God's being descriptive here. He means lots of descendants when Abraham didn't have any descendants. So he's figuratively using stars and sand to convey many descendants to Abraham. Now, even today, scientists admit they don't know how many stars there are. And you can only see about 3,000 of them with the naked eye. That's at a good place because maybe you can see 10 around here. But only 3,000 with naked eye. Now, I came across this estimate, and I realized that God has a real sense of humor. But lots of stars. Scientists say they estimate the number of stars to 10 to the 21st power. Now, I'm not real good at that. I just know that's a lot of stars. A lot of stars. But then I read where scientists estimate the grains of sand. Now, I mean, this is really hard. The grains of sand on the seashore to be 10 to the 25th power. So that's a lot of sand. But I'm just curious. But as scientists discover more and more stars, would it be kind of interesting if these two numbers matched up someday? I don't know. But I think God was saying something there. Now, I'm not going to go into any detail, but the Bible has made statements consistent with astronomy, with meteorology, with biology, with anthropology. That's study of mankind. Over 2,700 references to man and woman in the Bible and their actions. So the Bible's made statements consistent with hydrology, with geology, and believe it or not, even with physics. And when you look at it, they'll say it's quantum physics. So that's really out of my league. But the Bible's there. Now, here are some scientific facts that were clearly stated. And I'm just going to throw the thing out there in a reference. I'm not going to go into reading the reference, but you can spend some time doing it. How about air has weight? Find that out in Job. Job 28:25. Air has weight. How about this one? All things consist of things which are not visible to the naked eye. All things consist. Now, we know there's atoms, and we can't see atoms with the naked eye. But the Hebrews told us that all things consist of things which are invisible to the naked eye. How about this one? The earth was not flat, which was believed for most of human history. Most of human history thought the earth was flat. Remember, Columbus was going to fall off, people thought. The Bible said it wasn't that way at all. And we learned that in the first verse we gave you. Gave a number of things, but one of them was the circle of the earth. The earth was round. Isaiah said that. There are other Bible verses that talk about the rotation and things. How about the existence of dinosaurs? Job 40:15-24. Now, this is what I'm just going to read a little bit about this verse. I'm not going to read it all, but I'm going to read 15-19 and 24 to verse 24. Look at the behemoth, which I made along with you, which feeds on the grass like an ox. What strength it has in its loins, what power in the muscles of its belly. Its tail sways like a cedar. Remember the cedars of Lebanon? Its tail sways like a cedar. The sinews of its thighs are as close-knit. Its bones are tubes of bronze, its limbs like rods of iron. It ranks first among the works of God, yet its maker can approach it with his sword. Can anyone capture it by his eyes, or trap it, or pierce its nose? Question mark. Now have some fun. Have some fun some night. Get a cup of coffee. You can't sleep at night. Get your computer, start Googling some of this science stuff, and you'll learn. But Google this one. Read the Hebrew words of what Job was talking about. Okay, and I'm convinced that Job knew he wasn't talking about an elephant or a hippopotamus, an Egyptian seahorse. Some footnotes may say that. But anyway, you could better probably find, if you look in a little boy's toy box, you might find something that looks like what Job was talking about. And it wasn't an elephant. But have some fun with that. How about the second law of thermodynamics? That's a law that says things move from order to disorder. Okay? Things are deteriorating. They're getting worse. They're decaying and deteriorating. We read that in Psalms 102, 25 to 26, and Hebrews 1, verses 10 and 11. Incidentally, this is one of the laws, one of the scientific laws that give evolutionists problems. Things get worse instead of better. Now think about it. You are never going to find an open field that left unattended is going to transform itself into a golf course. But you take a golf course, leave it unattended, it's going to transform itself into a vacant field full of trees and shrubs. That's the second law of thermodynamics. Hey, first law of thermodynamics gives them problems too, as does Louis Pasteur's law of biogenesis. That means smart things make smart things. Okay, yeah. A pile of dust doesn't become a spider, but a spider can make an egg that can become a spider. Okay. Smart things, life has to come from life. That's the law of biogenesis. First law of thermodynamics, Big Bang. Those things aren't compatible. But anyway, I just threw that out. That was just, I'm wondering. How about the orbit of the sun? Psalms 19, 4 to 6. Now you remember, scientists one time believed that the earth revolved around the sun. But in these verses, we find out that the sun has a circuit that it follows. Okay. That blood is necessary for life. We learn that in Leviticus. That's an important one. Too bad that many old doctors, killed thousands of people by trying to let the bad blood out of their system. Okay. Right down the road to Mount Vernon. George Washington. He had 3 doctors visiting him. All 3 doctors were bleeding George. They should have known better, but they didn't. It was there. Hey, while we're speaking of blood, this is something that's pretty interesting to me. Hebrew boys were to be circumcised. And we learn that in Genesis 17. They're to get circumcised. And they were to be circumcised on the 8th day. Bible's pretty, you bring them the 8th day. Jesus was circumcised on the 8th day. Now on the 8th day, the body produces vitamin K. Vitamin K is necessary for blood coagulation. Okay? Vitamin K reaches peak levels in a newborn on the 8th day, about the 8th day. So you got to wonder how they figured that out. Did hundreds of Hebrew babies bleed to death, or did God tell them do it on the 8th day? God told them to do it on the 8th day. Now science, I know, right now you're probably saying, Al, that's enough. We've had enough, you can get off of this. Okay, and it is enough. But there's a lot more. There's really a lot more. And really, I have a difficult time sleeping. So sometimes I listen to, I go to YouTube and I listen to, believe it or not, country and western singers singing gospel music. That'll really light you up and just make you feel good. Other times I do things like this. I search a verse and you'll find all kinds of references of science in the Bible. Now science is powerful. It's generated knowledge to do all kinds of things. Just in my lifetime, it's made it so I can carry a cell phone. I don't have to drive around looking for a public telephone to call home or call somebody. That was a problem. Hey, even worse, we're talking about driving. How about, the map gets you from point A to, it gets you from Washington to Baltimore. Once you get to Baltimore, you know where you're at. So you go to every other gas station to ask where I turn to. Don't have to do it now. I just plug in an address, and you get there. And I just told Ron Mulholland this today. We were talking about it. How about this one? Now, many of you will not know what I'm talking about. But I used to drive a car that had a vent window, that you crank the vent over. The reason why you cranked the vent open was so that you could direct some air, some warm air, to hit your body to help evaporate the sweat you were sweating from driving in a car without air conditioning. So all those things came to be in my lifetime. So science is wonderful. But as powerful as science is, there are some things which science cannot do. Science does not make moral judgments. When is euthanasia right? What are universal rights of men? What rights do we have? How about animal rights? Science can't make any moral judgments at all. Science can describe the world we live in, but they can't tell us if it's right, wrong, good, or bad. They can't. They can just describe it. Science doesn't make aesthetic judgments. Okay? Science can tell us the frequency of a G-flat note and the color and how our eyes register color and transmit that to our brain and how it coordinates that. But science can't tell us if Beethoven's symphony is better than a rock concert, or if a great work of art that's hanging in the Louvre is better than our child's stuff hanging on the refrigerator. And in my family, the refrigerator stuff is better. Okay. But they can't tell us that. We have to make those decisions based off of our own aesthetic criteria. And in our household, Nancy says the drawings are better. So I go with that. Science doesn't tell us how to use scientific knowledge. Now, scientists are concerned how their knowledge is used, and they want it to be used right and properly, but they don't make those decisions. Business people, whatnot, they make those decisions on how it's being used. And this last one, science doesn't draw conclusions about supernatural explanations. Does God exist? How about the supernatural entities interact with human lives? Hey, these are important questions. Science won't help you answer them. Questions that deal with the supernatural are, by definition, beyond the realm of nature. Hence, they're beyond the realm of science. Can't be studied by science. And you read the books, they're real big on that. I mean, I read a lot of stuff from the University of California say, hey, we don't get there, that's supernatural. Science doesn't deal with supernatural. It's an interesting point. The more deeply scientists see into the secrets of the universe, you would expect that God would fade more and more away from the picture. But that's not the case. Alan Sandage, you may have heard of Alan Sandage, maybe not, but he's a world-renowned astronomer. He says he was almost a practicing atheist as a 20-year-old. And he began to despair because science couldn't answer some of the questions that he had. It was just, in age 50, Sandy says, I willed myself to accept God. This is what he said. It was my science that drove me to the conclusion that the world is much more complicated than can be explained by science. It's only through the supernatural that I can understand the mystery of existence. Now remember the question, why does the Bible contain so much anti-scientific nonsense? Well, that question was just thrown out to confuse the uneducated. We have shown that the Bible has said nothing that contradicts science. And often, the Bible is well ahead of science. Now we find out that because the Bible and God deal with the supernatural, science can't be used to check it. It's an easy out. We're criticized for containing anti-scientific nonsense, and they say science can't validate it or not. Because it's supernatural, they can't evaluate it. Now, maybe I should have said earlier, but science is ever learning. It's a Latin word, scientia, which means knowledge based on demonstrated and reproducible data. That's what science is. They can demonstrate it and they can reproduce it. Now, science is based on facts, not on opinions or preferences. It's based on facts. It's a process to challenge ideas through research. You gather empirical evidence to support a hypothesis with the result to either support or contradict the theory. Now, by the way, there's not enough empirical evidence to support and to move evolution beyond the theory. Not enough empirical evidence to do that. Empirical evidence is information acquired by observation or by experimentation. Now, if we focus on the observation point of that, I think we have more opportunities than you can imagine to believe that God is real. Now, I once read that there was a gathering on a street corner, and a street evangelist was preaching. And this preacher was preaching on Jesus, the wedding at Cana, and changing water into wine. And there was a skeptic in the crowd. And he turned to the man next to him and said, "Do you believe that? Do you really believe that?" The man looked at him and said, yeah, I do believe that. I said, he said, in my life, Jesus, he took away my desire and my addiction to wine, and he changed it into rent and grocery money for my family. See, this man had a testimony. People could observe the change in this man. In the late 1800s, there was a Hugh Price Hughes. He was a fire and brimstone preacher that served as the first superintendent of the West London Methodist Mission. It's down in a very poor area of London. Pastor Hughes was a very famous soul winner. His name was recognized. At the same time, there was a Mr. Charles Bradlaugh. Now, he was the outstanding noted atheist of the time. He was ever questioning the validity of Christianity. Now, Mr. Bradlaugh offered to challenge Pastor Hughes to a debate, to debate the merits of Christianity, the validity of Christianity, as he stated. Of course, this was going to be back in those days, it would be an open letter. He'd write in the London Times would publish something, and then be a response published, back and forth. Pastor Hughes wasn't buying that. His reply was, hey, you're convinced of your opinion, and any dialogue will just be mental gymnastics, and no one's going to really benefit from that. What I propose to do is we bring in concrete evidence of the validity of the claims of Christianity in the form of men and women who have been redeemed from the lines of sin and shame by the influences of Christianity. So I'll bring in 100 folks whose lives have been positively transformed. Former alcoholics or former prostitutes or former thieves, former wife abusers. I'll bring in whose lives have been positively enhanced and changed by the influences of Christianity. And you bring in 100 people whose lives have been socially improved and benefited through the embracing of atheism. And if you can't bring in 100, you bring in 50. The debate ended right then and there. Bradlaugh had none. So, God is real. The Bible's real. His Word is real. As Paul said, it's sharper than a two-edged sword, right? The Bible, the Word of God is alive and powerful. So, I'm not a science man, and neither is Bill Nye. But I do understand empirical evidence. The scientists say, it's supernatural. And I'm saying it's empirical evidence. I can see evidence all around. I'd venture to say we could go to any place in the United States, any city or town in the United States, go find a Bible or a missionary Baptist church or a church that's a Bible-believing centered church. Go ask the pastor. Say, Pastor, do you have anybody in your congregation that has, life-changing experiences that came from those lives that Pastor Hughes was talking about? Now they've been transformed because they embraced Jesus Christ? The answer is, I bet you every pastor can say, yeah, we got Joe, or we got Bob, or we got so-and-so. We've got somebody like that. The point is, that man on the street corner that said he had a testimony. All of us have a testimony. The most powerful tool we have is our testimony. Now, some are more powerful, granted. Some are more descriptive, but we all have a testimony, and they're all very powerful when we convey them. We have one like the blind man. In John chapter 9, he says, I was once blind, but now I see. We all had a testimony. We were all blind at one time, and one time the light turned on. The Bible's not a science book, but when it speaks on science, it provides significant insight. It's a supernatural book. It points the way to get eternal life. And what else does it do? It gives us all kinds of facts and procedures to minimize conflict in this life, okay? So I'm going to tell you, you have a testimony. You need to be on guard not to damage it because others are watching you. Some of the most powerful tools that you have is just how you go about your life and people watch you. You're at work and you got struggles at work, and some people react and some people calm and cool. People see that. How about, I once heard of a man, who had a powerful impact. And when he asked why, one of his coworkers said, well, I saw you bow your head and pray before you ate. That was part of his testimony. So we all have one. So I want you to keep it, think about it, be an impact for God in it.